Breakfast, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. A simple Google search can present one with the definition of a word. One that I took up on a regular basis was banal. Here is what that search lets me know each and every time. Banal, pronounced banal or banal. Adjective, so lacking in originality as to be obvious and boring. Example, songs with banal repeated words. Synonyms, trite, hackneyed, cliched, platitudinous, vapid, commonplace, ordinary, common, stock, conventional, stereotypes, overused, overdone, overworked, stale, worn out, time-worn, tired, threadbare, hoary, hack, unimaginative, humdrum, ho-hum, unoriginal, uninteresting, dull, uninvolving, trivial. Etymology, mid-18th century, originally relating to feudal service in the sense compulsory, hence common to all. From French, from ban, awe, proclamation or call to arms. Ultimately of Germanic origin and related to ban. The specific morning of June 20th, my seeking comfort in Google's matter-of-factness and accuracy in defining words came just before breakfast. I was in Philadelphia for business, and, therefore, my company had put me in a far nicer hotel than I normally would have afforded myself. The beds reminded me that I was far from the top 1%, 10%, or 30% in this great nation of ours. The fitness center shouted to me that I was in far worse shape than most men my age, largely because of my lack of space-age equipment that I might use to combat that out-of-shapeness. And the breakfast. Woo! The breakfast sang out the joys of being on top. Choices abounded. Excess flourished. The breakfast at the Armington was second to none. As my per diem was far less than any chubby kid needs to really, truly eat their fill, I made a note of the time of the breakfast, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., the place of the breakfast, the mezzanine, and the extensive menu of/for the breakfast as soon as I'd checked in, going so far as to set my alarms on my phone and call in for a wake-up call as soon as I'd entered room 327, my home for the next 2 weeks. The business part of the trip is, in truth, trite, hackneyed, cliched, vapid, and so on and so forth. But the everything else about my first time in Philadelphia was far more out of my norm. In the mornings, I would wake up and zip down to the fitness center to squeeze in a workout in a vain attempt to better my fluffy body. I'd then hurry over to breakfast so that I could take advantage of as much of the spread for as long as I could each morning. Business dominated each day from roughly 9 a.m. to 4:45 p.m., though the business day ending wasn't actually the end of my business doings for the day. From 5 o'clock to at least 8 o'clock each evening, I had to go to happy hours galore with these people with whom I was spending 2 weeks in an attempt to schmooze toward the use of our firm over others. That meant that I wasn't back in my room until 9 o'clock p.m. Those last 3 or so hours to myself, I generally ordered some form of takeout food that would best soak up all that I'd imbibed over the course of those happy hours. Watch either the newest blockbuster I couldn't find on the movie channel or take in some good porn, depending on my mood, and then I'd play silly little word search games on my phone until I felt myself drifting. That said drifting had to be aided along with sleep medication was beside the point. My first weekend saw me getting to play the tourist across the city, and I loved every minute of it. Well, I loved every minute of it except a rather dicey bit on Saturday evening when I found myself in a not-so-friendly bar in a not-so-friendly neighborhood. But hey, it all shook out and I have a story or two to tell about how best not to offend bikers. That's for another day, though. All of this became my life for those 2 weeks, as it always did. Different cities, different faces, same life, really. That's the terror of becoming too well-traveled. You begin to realize that everything and everywhere and everyone is the same repeated ad infinitum. You can only put so many marble statues up and tout so much of your history, which is, of course, far more potent, important, and worthy to be paid for than those of other cities' histories. Some might find comfort in this. I most assuredly did not. The glamour and the electricity that used to come with a new place began to fade. Just like an addict, I had to travel more, attempting to find increasing foreignness in places in order to get something of that high I remember as once being so formidable. That's my life anyway. Cliched, platitudinous, vapid, commonplace, ordinary, common, stock, conventional, stereotyped. So, on my penultimate morning there in the hotel, I was going about my usual doings. Gym, then breakfast, then my day. Amid all that, at breakfast to be exact, I encountered something that gave me hope. Strange, I know. The banality of breakfast is in and of itself something that Google definitions should take in. Maybe list the meal as one of the more banal or put a picture under the definition or something. At any rate, I had been seated, ordered my coffee over tea, told the waitress that I would indeed love a warm croissant, and headed up to the lines for the buffet-style dining options. I bypassed all that healthy stuff that the doctor said I should limit myself to. Time and time again, she told me that eating the way I did would have me dead or in a very bad way in the next 5 years, but who the fuck was I to care about all that? No one else certainly did. Dark thoughts for a morning meal. As my brain did that sinuous dance between dark self-loathing and self-destruction and simply picking out what I'd like to eventually put on my croissant, Nutella of course, I got stuck behind an older couple that was, I learned from a very loud conversation with, or to anyone that would listen, on their 30th wedding anniversary. My first thought was that I sure as shit would not have chosen Philadelphia of all places for such an occasion, but I quickly shoved that cynicism down and attempted to eavesdrop with a bit more levity and happiness for the two. That shoving down only lasted a moment. Rather quickly, I realized that the two were taking far too much time choosing their various bits of breakfast, so I sidestepped them and hurriedly grabbed my hulking plate, of which I knew there would be another, and another, and maybe even another. Again, I had a problem. Having moved past the two slow-mos, I was happy to plop down at my place and see my coffee delivered. The waitress was extremely apologetic that my croissant was not yet ready. That was okay, though, I said. It'd come in due time. I'm sure. I placed my too fancy for me burgundy cloth napkin in my lap and prepared to launch into my I love myself, I hate myself style of vacuuming up food when the little anniversary couple trundled over and plopped themselves down at the table right next to me. As if their massive girth being such that their arms all but touched me wasn't enough. As if their open-mouthed breathing, eating, and general being wasn't enough. As if their massive breakfast intake coupled with a Diet Coke each, as if that mattered, wasn't enough, they launched into an argument about bread. Apparently the man did not like all the, and I quote, frou-frou, unquote, breads that these sorts of places served. Clearly, I looked down at where my future croissant would be and gave a mental fuck you. He was up in arms about having to eat some heavier brown barley bread with his half-gallon of butter and raspberry jam. That tirade became even more intense when he realized that his dear wife had found the, and I quote again, quote, normal square bread that real Americans like to eat, unquote. I forked more runny egg and blueberry pancake into my mouth, concentrating even harder on my plate, trying my damnedest to use my steely focus to block out this absolute and utter, oh wait, banality. Day after day, night after night, I felt my life, myself, my everything begin to be banal, an open exercise of banality. But here was that word coming to life before me. This conversation, these people, everything about this square toast somehow being the superior breakfast breadstuff to all other breadstuffs, was nothing if not trite, hackneyed, cliched, platitudinous, vapid, commonplace, ordinary, common, stock, conventional, stereotyped, overused, overdone, overworked, stale, worn out, time-worn, tired, threadbare, hoary, hack, unimaginative, humdrum, ho-hum, unoriginal, uninteresting, dull, uninvolving, trivial. I giggled, spewing some crumbs and orange goop down my chin and onto the front of my shirt. I tried not to laugh harder, but I just couldn't suppress it. How ridiculous this life these two were living. If that's what they were doing at all. The dark side of my brain rejoiced, going full steam ahead into the void of what I can only think of as a naturalist brand of nihilism, dashed with my own peculiar brand of narcissistic indifference toward others. The brighter side of my brain exulted, celebrating the newly learned fact that I am not, as I often worried, the most blasé person with the most blasé life on the planet. All of my thoughts came to a screeching halt. Wait. Or was I? I pulled out my phone and opened Chrome. Blasé. Pronounced blasé. Adjective. Unimpressed or indifferent to something because one has experienced or seen it so often before. Example, she was becoming quite blasé about the dangers. Synonyms, indifferent, unconcerned, uncaring, casual, nonchalant, offhand, uninterested, apathetic, unimpressed, unmoved, surfeited, jaded, unresponsive, phlegmatic, informal, laid back. These children have learned to be blasé about the sound of gunfire. Etymology, early 19th century, French past participle of blasé, cloy, probably ultimately of Germanic origin. I stopped laughing, stared straight ahead, and began to pile Nutella on my own square piece of plain wheat bread. Apparently, they were out of croissants. Thank you for listening to Breakfast. All the sounds behind this track were taken from freesound.org. User Notumbug recorded the Happy Little Harmony sample, which is being used under a Creative Commons CC0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication License. And user Blimp66 is responsible for the fun little vocal tune, which is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 unported license. Thank you to both these artists for uploading their work to freesound.org. Next up, we have some perspective on Herod the Great of biblical fame, or infamy, coming your way. Stay tuned.